Welcome everyone to Endgame Episode 2. I'm your host, Christopher Halali. Now, as everybody is well aware, we are now on a tenuous point in geopolitics. There is a ceasefire supposedly in place. We are waiting now for confirmation of the Iranian team that's supposed to head to Islamabad in Pakistan, which helped to mediate the conflict. The Pakistani Prime Minister has been at the forefront of trying to mediate between Iran, the United States, and Israel. Now, we had a ceasefire put into effect, and right after that, we had just hours later, the Israeli military launched a brutal assault on Beirut, the capital of Lebanon, as well as throughout the country, and within 10 minutes dropped 160 bombs, killing nearly 250 people or so, and wounding 1,000. So we are in a very delicate situation. There's also been breaks in the ceasefire. There were attacks by some of the Gulf states against Iran in retaliation. There's real concern that unless Lebanon is included in the ceasefire, that Iran will, of course, defend Lebanon and will defend the resistance and the people against the aggression of the United States and Israel. So it remains to be seen what's going to come of this. But one thing is certain. We are not out of the woods quite yet. And as everyone's saying, this is far from over. It's clear that the Trump administration has also issues internally with talking points. And with a lot of the ongoing concerns over where is this headed. The military buildup is still in the Persian Gulf and in the surrounding region. There's even more assets that are headed there and that have been going there in the past days. And there's, of course, the concern that since the Strait of Hormuz has closed again because of the inability of the Israeli government to restrain itself from its slaughter, that this will prompt the Trump administration to also call upon NATO partners to intervene, which the media today is reporting on. So there's a lot happening there. There's also a lot of other issues generally in the region. Of course, this came as a big surprise. I actually was on Pakistan TV when it broke. And this was a very big story, but ultimately, I think we are not so sure what's to happen. My first guest, I think, has a lot to say about this and generally about this issue. He's also an Iranian-American like I am, and I'd like to bring him on. He's a poet. He's an author. He's a teacher of the Persian language, and very much active in the political sphere these days. Not only as a thinker, as a public intellectual, but also as a critic of some of the real, I would say, downsides of the diaspora, some of the dark sides of the diaspora that we've seen over the past 6 weeks or so. So I'd like to bring and welcome Sharghzadeh to the program. It's a pleasure to have you on, brother. Finally, nice to see you in at least digitally. I wish I could join your poetry classes in New York, and I hope to join your Persian classes too, because my Persian is not so good. I blame my Babajan for that. But welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I would love to have you join any of our classes, and we'll read Rumi together, the great Rumi. You know, that's usually what I like to talk about, is the stuff that I work on, my book, my classes, and it's such an unfortunate situation that we have to divert our attention towards defending Iran from this onslaught.
I know. I agree with you. I mean, you and I'm sure, very much akin in this. As many Iranians, we grew up on Rumi, on Ferdowsi, Hafez, Khayyam, reading the Shahnameh. You know, there's so many aspects to our culture, such a rich culture, a historic culture, 6,000 year or so civilization. And now, of course, we have had the Trump administration openly saying that they want to erase the civilization in a night. I mean, these things are horrific. I want to ask you first and foremost to introduce yourself to the audience and sort of yourself as an Iranian-American. What's your background and what brought you to this point where you're at today?
Sure. My name is Muhammad Ali Mujarradi. That's my government name. Sharghzadeh means struck by the east, because I would go to Iran and banter with my family and say, you guys are west struck. You're Gharb-Zadeh, which was a term popularized by the very famous socialist Iranian writer Jalal al-Ahmad. And he said Iranians have been struck by the West, when really, perhaps maybe I'm speaking for him here, maybe revealing a bit of my bias, but our future maybe lies in the East, not in the West. So I chose that name as an admission that I am a Western Iranian and that I'm going towards the East consciously. I spent time in Iran as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, living there, working there, seeing the reality on the ground, becoming a real lover of the country and its people, not just because of diasporic reasons or emotional reasons, but because I really did live among them, unlike what a lot of my critics seem to think these days. And while I was in Iran, I studied Persian. I learned classical Persian, which is slightly different than the modern Persian that maybe you and I would speak. And I started to get into teaching the literature online. And unfortunately, perhaps maybe you can relate to this. The U.S. empire strikes you no matter where you are. They were shutting down my accounts, which is well publicized. If you just look up my name in banking, it'll come up. And they were just shutting my bank accounts down, basically. And they were saying, if you're an Iranian-American living in Iran, you can't get access to banking in America. So eventually, unfortunately, my time in Iran had to come to a close. I had to leave the country. And life happened, fate happened. I ended up here in New York because my wife is a New Yorker, Iranian-American. And I told myself that I would wait here and do my work here as long as I could. And that as soon as I found a way to live in Iran again without being sanctioned, without having my voice, my platforms taken away, I would go to Iran. But what ended up happening was that same plague followed me here now with demonetizations and posts being removed with, the so-called free speech regime we have here. It's not so free sometimes. And we've been fighting this fight together, you and I, on the internet, this media war against this onslaught, this medieval siege, this barbaric attack on this ancient nation of 90 million people. Now Trump is saying he wants to bomb us to the Stone Age, destroy us, get rid of us. I've been telling people that the U.S. empire is not so benevolent towards its adversaries. Like any empire, we shouldn't infantilize ourselves or make anyone else out to be evil more than reality. Empire is empire, and war is war. So I've been trying to get my fellow Iranians, especially in the diaspora, awake to this reality of being weak, of being preyed upon by a larger army, and America doing what it does best: Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. We've seen the playbook before.
Absolutely, you're spot on. I'm sure you and I have similar experiences. I mean, I was leaving middle school and going into high school when 9/11 happened. I remember, of course, my last name, Halali. I had an Iranian father, a Shia Muslim father. And so, of course, all of that, rained down on me very quickly. And people wouldn't even touch me, wouldn't hang out with me, wouldn't dance with me, nothing. It was like I had the plague. I had smallpox in school. And really, it was a reality for me that was new. It was a new understanding of myself, and one that, of course, catapulted me even more so into political activism. Even though I grew up with a political family, I was more quietist, as we say. But after that, I was very much on the streets against the Iraq War, and from then on, it's been nonstop. And so I think that you probably have similar experiences of what it's like to grow up in the diaspora. But we've seen others in the diaspora, and they're sort of, like you said, instead of the East toxification like we have. I think I went to the East as well. I went to China, studied there for 2 years, got my master's there. I'm very much enamored by the East, by Eurasia. But a lot of them really wanted to be white. A lot of Iranian diaspora wanted to be white. They tried to distinguish themselves and separate themselves from Arabs, from Muslims. We are somehow different. We're unique. We're not like them. Even though genetically I did DNA test and I've got the whole region. Mm-hmm. But I want to ask you. I want to ask you, you have been at the forefront of trying to deconstruct a lot of what you've seen in the diaspora, and I want to commend you for that effort. It's been a heroic effort, and of course, it's cost you deplatforming, canceling bank accounts, all of that. We're aware of that, and also a lawsuit, I believe, with Elika Laban. I don't know if that's still ongoing, and I don't know if you can speak about the legal parameters of that.
Sure, yeah, I can speak a bit about it. So, yeah, it's interesting, all the things you mentioned. I went through something similar. Actually, I missed the first few days of school the year of 9/11 because we had a family wedding. And in Iran, summer begins a little later and it ends a little later. So kids go to school in late September in Iran because of the heat and the differences. So it was a summertime wedding, but during the school year. So I didn't actually see 9/11 in class as many students, and I was sheltered from it. My dad didn't want me to deal with the fallout, from me while I was on the trip. But I knew something was wrong when we were flying back to America and our plane was empty except a few other people. People were still spooked, even though the planes had returned. And while I was eating extra ice cream and running around up and down the plane, little did I know how much my world had just changed in that moment. And actually, I have family here, Iranian-American New Yorkers, who watched the planes go down. And when that was happening in that exact moment, it could have been anyone, right? The U.S. empire has made many enemies over the years, but they could have never imagined how it would change their life so drastically that people who were cool with them would suddenly look at them, like you said, like they have the plague or they have some sort of disease or scabies or something. You know, oh my God, get away from me. Names had to be changed. People start to short. I mean, there were reprisals. A poor Sikh gentleman was killed because he was wearing a turban. So it's a very serious scar. And unfortunately, or fortunately for them, I should say, many Iranians who live in the West, especially in Europe, have come with the more recent immigration waves. So they didn't go through that. We've gone through it all. I have a sense from your background that maybe your family's been in the West for, like mine, more than a few decades. We've seen Reza Pahlavi come and go. One of the reasons that I was not struck by him in any particular ways because we've seen this rigmarole before. Every protest movement in the 90s when Khatami came in, there were students in the 2000s and the Green Movement. We've seen this song and dance that he does, the lies, we were going to do a peaceful transition. Now he's gotten worse, certainly. Now he openly advocates for war. Now he's openly a cheerleader for Netanyahu and co. But we've seen him. We've seen 9/11. We've seen the attitude of the U.S. empire. We saw the Iraq war, the buildup, bomb, Iran, how they were justifying the war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. I remember when I went to school, they were, now they don't even bother. The empire doesn't really even bother, and you can see how it's in decline, to generate consent for destroying a country. When I was growing up, when you were growing up, they did. They gave us books to read about Iran and Afghanistan and Iraq in school. They had a whole unit. I can't remember what it was, in social studies, global studies, where they were telling us basically these people are backwards, their women wear black veils and they're not allowed to go outside and they hate, and back then they didn't have so much wokeness in the school, so they wouldn't say gays, but they hate all kinds of people. And they showed us movies about people being traumatized in Iran. And I remember sitting there watching it thinking, oh, I've been to that place. I've been over here. I've seen this before. I've spoken to these people. So we grew up in that. The new waves of Iranians, unfortunately, they're not aware of any of that stuff. They came after the wars have wrapped. I mean, some of these people, when you talk to them in London, I've been to London, I've been to Istanbul, they've been here for a year, 2 years. They didn't interact with any of this environment. They came after the kind of shift against open racism in American society. Although not to say America's great or evil, just to give credit where credit's due, after the George Floyd incident, a lot of work was done to try to avoid racial comments. It became very uncomfortable. I mean, back before that, growing up, you and I, racial comments were very normal. I remember people would just introduce me to their friends. A white friend would introduce me to their white friends and say, hey, this is Muhammad, my friend, but don't worry, he's not a terrorist. He's not going to blow us up. Or people would make just all kinds of comments openly to me. I remember kids would just come up to me on 9/11 and say something to taunt me for years. And that was just, nowadays, probably that wouldn't happen. But so suffice to say, a lot of Iranians abroad haven't interacted with this. They haven't been around long enough. I don't want to pull this card of, I've been here longer than you, but we really have. We've seen this come and go. We've seen this game show before, this smoke and mirror show, this, we're here to save you people. So many of them, unfortunately, not only are they unaware, but they've been swept up in a vibe, which that's also dangerous too. We've seen vibes sweep people up. We had, during COVID, we had the vibes, before that, there were different vibes where people get swept up. You see, suddenly, I remember there was a meme. You put in the Ukraine chip, and then you put in the George Floyd chip, and then you put in the whatever chip. Have you seen this meme where it's like someone has a chip on the back of their head and they just like put the latest cause? Now, not to say that any cause is right or wrong. I'm not here to pass judgment on people. Surely, Black Americans are mistreated, and we shouldn't make light of that. But it is true that suddenly issues become important. People who 2 years ago didn't know the difference between Iran and Iraq and couldn't point to one or the other on a map. And I remember I grew up with people saying, oh, you're from Iran? Aren't you getting bombed? They didn't even know the difference between the countries they're at war with. The Americans were so ignorant of the world. And now those people are so suddenly concerned about Iran and Iranians and, there's this issue. And I say, I remember you. We went to school together. You didn't even know where I'm from. Why are you passionately posting about it? Anyway, so now I'm ranting a bit, but
No, I think you're spot on. Actually, I want to play a clip for our viewers so that they can see some of the work that you're doing on social media. I took a 37-second clip, and I want to put that up here now so that our viewers can see.
Please. This isn't an old video. They're still singing and dancing. It's not from a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 5 days ago. That was taken today in Toronto. While Iranians are dying, buried under rubble, breathing in toxic fumes from the gas distillations that were bombed. Iranians are living through hell on earth. My friends from high school, when they can get through to me, they say, our homes are shaking, we're afraid. I saw a video taken at noon where my friend said, what time of day do you think it is? And I thought it was night. It was noon because the sky is full of dust and soot and smoke. Iranians have a tradition that when there is a death, people show somberness. They postpone events. They postpone birthday parties. They don't dance. They don't sing. They wait until 40 days have passed, and then they resume with their normal life. They wear black. They don't shave, or they shave their heads. We have so many mourning rituals. It's one of the most beautiful and tender parts of our culture, how much care we give to our dead. And
I mean, that's very point for me. Of course, I'm still wearing black. People used to laugh at me and say you wear black every day. And I have a lot of people in my life who've passed, and I have been in a lot of zones, especially as a war correspondent, also as a fighter in Syria in 2017. I lost a lot of people, so black has become sort of my color. Default, which for my family, for some of them, it's a default color. But I accept that. It's part of our culture. It's part of our heritage. I love it. I embrace it. And I haven't been dancing and celebrating and things like that. You and I have been mourning because our families, I couldn't even talk to my family members, couldn't get in contact with anyone. One of the things that you've done so well, I think, and I think that people on social media have really gravitated towards you, is that you've shown the hypocrisy, and you've also shown that by trying to embrace the West, a lot of Iranians undercut their own identities. They kind of dissolve their identities and try to adopt something completely alien. A lot of this, even this kind of faux Zoroastrianism and things like that, has nothing to do with real Zoroastrians. I've been to India. I lived in India for a year. I know the Parsi community. I know they're extremely conservative. Even people are traditionally veiled and much more conservative in their clothing. Not like this style of your short mini skirts and things. Everybody says you can combine all of these things. So it's very postmodern. It's very much as Benedict Anderson was talking about the development of nationalism and sort of a new identities through these processes of modernity. I want to ask you about what this experience has been for you these past 6 weeks in terms of really confronting some of the ills of the community and also calling out a lot of the stuff that is frankly just bogus. It's pure propaganda at this point.
It's been very painful to see the decline of what I thought were some of the most redeeming parts of our culture. Iran has its flaws. I'm no stranger to talking about that. To some people's chagrin, I have a lot of people who dislike the cultural criticism, quote unquote, that I've done. But I've always tried to highlight the positives as well. And some of the positives have now been wiped away by this diaspora crowd. One was that Iranians were a very polite people. You don't often find Iranians cursing. In fact, that's one thing they find shocking about Americans is the whole, and it's true, we have this culture of, I'm here in New York, F-bombs and hey, what's up, you blank you and blank you. Iranians were not into this. We're very polite. We pride ourselves on our refined speech, on our eloquence. It's part of the, you could say, culture of linguistics. You've been in the region a lot, so you know of Arabs, Iranians. This region, we love eloquent speech. And to see all of the chants and the protests, they're just the worst curse words. And again, I don't know how to impart it to an American audience. This is just foreign to us. Some of these curse words they're saying were as taboo as the worst racial slurs in the English language. Think about if you hear a very bad racial slur, said with full might, how you just kind of shake to your core and think, whoa, did someone just say that? Maybe if you're Northern, if you drive through the South, in the rural South, you'll have this experience. You think, whoa, did I just hear that word? Well, that's how we feel as Iranians when you look at these protests with women, children, families in public, and they're saying, I did this to your that, and your mother is this, and I won't even go into detail. I'm just the words they use, you don't even hear them uttered, to the point where many of my diaspora students, they kept starting to ask me, hey, what do these words mean? Because their families never said them, and they never went out in the streets in Iran. They're from Canada, they're from America. I'm actually running a class soon called On Persian Curse Words, because I have so many of my students reach out to me saying, what are these words even? We've never even heard them. So just seeing that, and also the lack of civility, the racism, all the disgusting behaviors we see in this particular group. And when I say the diaspora, I don't mean all of them. They're a minority and shrinking by the day. And it's just so disheartening to see the things I used to point to. I used to say, Iran has its governance problems and we have our societal problems, and we've been struggling for the last 2 centuries to confront the modern West, like all Eastern nations, like China, like Russia. We've all had similar struggles. But look at these beautiful things we have. And it's so sad to see those things come under attack by these people who I really feel are wittingly or unwittingly, maybe the masses among them, hopefully, are unwittingly enemies of the Iranian nation and culture. So not just the nation in the sense that they are supporting two nuclear powers doing an onslaught against Iran, threatening to destroy the whole thing, but also an enemy in maybe a deeper spiritual sense. Our spirituality includes this politeness, this refinement, and religion. Part of Iranian identity is the Muslim identity, which is mostly has Sufi and Shia colorings. We have Rumi and we have Imam Hussein. These things are Iranian religiosity. Our soul and spirit have been poured into this vessel for over 1,300 years. And whether they like it or not, this is the real representation of who we are. And I've spoken to so many people from different places in the world, and although they might be secular, they never shy away from their traditional religious heritage. They never deny it. I've spoken to many secular Russians here in New York City, secular, broadly speaking Slavic people, but they have a deep respect for Orthodoxy. You go to their apartment, they have icons. They make the motions before they eat. They show respect to their religious heritage. They would never, again, these Slavic New Yorkers of all countries that I've gotten to know here, they would never tolerate someone mocking Orthodoxy or disrespecting their traditional religious system, because that's just a basic human trait. And so these Iranians who've been psyoped, and it really is, I know this word gets used for everything, but it really was a psyop. A gentleman named Akhundzadeh about 100 some years ago cooked up this reimagining of the Iranian identity. And Reza Zia Ibrahimi has written about it extensively in his work, The Emergence of Iranian Nationalism. And he posited Iran not as a country that sits south of Russia, east of India, west of India, east of the Arabs, but as a European nation that was displaced. And you see this where the Shah would say, we are an Indo-European people who, by an accident of history, ended up in this geography. This idea that Iran is not an Indo-European nation, but in this geography, it should have been in Europe. We should be in Germany or something like that. And he cooked up a very kind of plausible worldview, right? That's why so many people bought into it, of we were Zoroastrians and we were made to be Muslim. And our neighbors aren't the Slavs and the South Asians and the Arabs. Our neighbors are really, the Western Europeans. And for some stupid reason, God forsook us to be in this godforsaken desert. And so many Iranians bought into this, and now they've just fully lost themselves. And you mentioned, the Parsis. I'm sure you also know they're also a very closed community. They don't really take converts. It's pretty rare. People often think that they think, for example, Jews don't take converts. Jews do, but it's hard. Parsis really, I remember I interviewed a Parsi gentleman as part of an oral history job I had as a 19-year-old. I was translating for a local historian. And we were interviewing Iranians of various backgrounds. Now, he happened to speak English because he's from India, but I was still there. And he said that we had one convert in America, and he was a gentleman who'd become a professor of Zoroastrian studies and had dedicated his life to Zoroastrianism. And finally, in his old age, he was allowed to convert, and it sent shockwaves throughout the community that, whoa, we allowed a convert. We don't do this. It's an ethno-religion. All due respect, that's fine. They can have their ethno-religion, and they don't bother anyone. And these Iranians go and say, oh, we're Zoroastrian. Now, I met an Iranian Zoroastrian, and he hated these people. It was really funny. He said, oh, I know your work. He just came up to me. We started talking. He said, these Zoro LARPers, as I call them, Zoroastrian LARPers, I hate these people to my core. He said they make other Zoroastrians and Parsis doubt Iranian Zoroastrians. He said when I'm outside of Iran and I go to Zoroastrian temples, they often stop and say, whoa, 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 you're Iranian. Are you a real Zoroastrian or are you one of the fakers? And he says then they force me to recite prayers. And they say, okay, welcome, brother. We thought you're one of the fakers. Because the fakers, what they would do is they would go to India, they would go to Southeast Asia, they would go to Chicago or LA and say, oh, hey, I'm a Zoroastrian. And the unwitting Indian Zoroastrians would say, oh, welcome. And they would go and they would make a mockery, or they would be taking selfies with the fire, and they wouldn't be taking their shoes off or something. And they were saying, this is a sacred space. You can't just usurp our identity. And then what was funny is his perspective was many of the people who are quote unquote, Zoro LARPers, they have Arab heritage. Their name would be like Sayyid Hussein Tabo Taboi. And he thinks, you're actually the descendant of the Arab Muslims. Like, why do you want to abandon your ancestry and join my ancestry?
Yeah,
Why
yeah.
don't you just respect your ancestors?
Or last names like Karbalai or Najafi or this kind of things, and you're like, you're not even like,
so
what?
Absurd.
It's absurd.
It's so absurd, yeah.
And I wanna connect this. We have a limited time. My kind of like last question for you is,
Sure.
I want to connect this all with not only this culture of martyrdom and resistance, which is very much rooted in our DNA. I don't care if it's only 1,300 years. That is Iranian culture now.
Yeah.
What happened before there, I have no clue. I'd have to go and look in the archaeological, history for that. But
Right.
it really is part of our identity, and that has not changed for generations. And I wanna ask you. We are now at a quote unquote ceasefire. I don't know if it's gonna last. I think a lot of people are very nervous about what's to come. I finally heard from some family members. They're very resolute. And they sent me like a one-line text after I sent 50 texts, and I was like, oh well, I guess there we go. they're ready to go. So I want to ask you, where do we go from here? What's happening now on the ground from what you know, and what do you see the next steps for Iran and for the region?
It's very hard to tell. At first, I thought perhaps the idea was, okay, we've fought enough, we've proven our point, we'll negotiate from a position of strength. But then immediately they started the same games of, Lebanon wasn't part of it, even though it was initially said to be part of it. And the same old subterfuge and smoke and mirror show of using negotiations as a way to distract us and to circle the wagons and figure out the next steps. And perhaps Iran has now finally lost patience with this and is doing the same thing. So in earlier negotiations, maybe Iranians we gave them too much of the benefit of the doubt, too much good faith that, America will negotiate as an honest partner in negotiations. But maybe now that Iran has come to this conclusion, there's just no hope, you just have to fight your way out of this. They also took the negotiations or the ceasefire also with the understanding that they're just replenishing themselves, they're circling the wagons, they're taking a moment maybe to have meetings where they're not worried about, gathering 10 or 20 people is necessary to coordinate a defensive campaign, and you can't do that when you're getting bombed wherever you go. So perhaps there is also some machinations on the Iranian side. Who knows? Ultimately, we say in Persian, insan be umid zindas. And, I translated this Rumi book. Rumi says things like that very often, that, we are alive with hope. So one would hope that maybe Trump will get off the devil's horse, as we say in Persian, and he will back down and stop listening to those demons whispering in his ear and listen to reason and faith. And that faith which he professes, that he'll actually take a note from his Christian faith and stop this evil, basically, according to his own words, genocidal campaign. But we're going to cross our fingers. The Iranian response has already inspired more confidence in people. I'm getting messages from people. They're bullying me. They're saying, why are you still a critic of the government of Iran? Why don't you just, instead of defending the people, also defend the government? And these are people who a year ago hated the government. A year ago or even 6 months ago, they were saying, I hope that the government collapses during the 12-day war. And now they've become so inspired by how competent the response was. They're flipped to the other side. They would totally, I guess the government won the mandate of heaven back or something. To borrow a Chinese term, because you see people many people, more than kind of a sample error, have said to me, whoa, I was surprised. I thought these guys were goners. Just to finish the point, I used to bring up the Strait of Hormuz as a point to people. What if Iran closes it? Almost to a person, pro-government, anti-government, analyst, layman, they would always say, oh, that's impossible. If they threaten the global economy, that it would be the end. It would be like as if they nuked someone. It would just be flattened. And now what are we going on? I guess it's open slightly now, but we went on 2 weeks basically where they just closed it and the world kind of couldn't do anything about it. So maybe Iran was actually much stronger than we imagined, and we were psyoped into believing it's a paper tiger when it really did have cards up its sleeve.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that Iran has, revealed that it actually has a lot more power and power projection and strategic depth than anyone imagined before. And also that Iran, because of our culture, we have this, like you were alluding to, we have this culture of ta'aruf and all of these aspects of our existence. I think Iran was so generous with even its enemies that it tried to, okay, befarma, everything's okay, come in, no problem. And now all of a sudden they're like, okay, well, now this is over, 1, 2, 3 times we can't tolerate it anymore. And by doing that, I think they've revealed a tremendous amount of power that was stored within, and also a resilience and a tenacity that a lot of people didn't expect. A lot of people were like, okay, we do Venezuela style, we kill the supreme
Right.
leader, we kill the leadership of the military and sort of the political elite, and everything is going to collapse. And in reality, no, that's not how it works. They
Right.
assumed.
Yeah.
They assumed incorrectly. They didn't read the history of Karbala. They didn't read the history of all the different invasions. When Hulagu Khan came, they didn't really understand what they were up against. And now I think
Absolutely.
they have a better idea at this point.
Right. Absolutely. Completely agreed.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much. You're doing amazing work. All of the stuff that you're doing. I want if you can plug in some of your media where people can follow you.
Yeah, sure. So my @ is the name that you've plugged on the screen, at Sharghzadeh on YouTube, on Twitter, on Instagram. So the short form videos are on Instagram and TikTok. On Twitter, I banter with people, I fight with people. And on YouTube, we're releasing longer form videos, and a stream will be starting soon. I'm working on some of the fine-tuned details. But besides all of that, some people are not necessarily politically inclined, but culturally inclined. It's really this type of work. So I have a book on Rumi called The Flame of Love. I have a website, Persian Poetics, which is my main thing. I wasn't even really posting on my personal page before the conflict. So Persian Poetics is where I deep dive into Persianate culture. You mentioned Ferdowsi, Hafez, Shahnameh, Rumi, all these greats that they're the reason Persians are beloved in the world. Besides our rugs and our food, I really think this spiritual heritage is so valuable. And here in New York City, if anyone's listening in New York, we have a weekly Persian dinner. Our home doubles as a cultural center. We move everything around, and we all sit in a circle. We eat Persian food. We read Rumi, and in these days, we also we kind of give each other heart strength, as we say in Persian. قوة قلب. We have sympathetic ears here. Everyone here is a lover of Iran's culture and people, and we have diverse discussions. It's New York City. All kinds of interesting people come, and we learn about the world together, like this conversation as well. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much again. Heli Moshakeram, Heli Mamnoon, and look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you. So as you heard there, I mean, it's a fact. It's an indisputable fact that Iranians are not only resilient, are not only a deep culture, a vast resource of all traditions and heritage and you name it for thousands of years, but also that because of that diversity, Iranians are also prone to a lot of the issues that many communities are, especially in their diasporas. So we see this ongoing struggle within the diaspora, those who are supporting Iran, those who are supporting the people, those who are resisting against the US and Israeli aggression on Iran. And then you see, for example, those in the diaspora who are openly supporting the aggressors, who are openly advocating for regime change. Sadly, we've seen that in many other diaspora communities, especially for the major powers in the world that are maybe against the unipolar world order and much more supportive of a multipolar world order. I think that it's clear for everyone to see that what Iran has accomplished in the past, 5 to 6 weeks has been unprecedented and really earth-shattering. It's a historic moment. It's what we in history called an axial moment in history, where we're seeing a transformation in the global system. So I think that that's really, really important to recognize, to understand. And I'd like to then bring in a wonderful, wonderful guest, a dear friend of the show, Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and also was involved with was a senior staff member of U.S. Representative Ron Paul's in the Congress. Welcome. It's a pleasure to see you again. How are you?
Hi, Chris. It's great to see you again, too. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. Let me get your immediate reactions. We haven't really spoke all these weeks. I know that you were ill. You look great. I'm sure that you've recovered and bounced back. I was able to talk to Ron Paul, but I want to get your perspective. What has happened since February 28th? What's your perspective on what's going on?
Well, I think you absolutely nailed it, Chris. I mean, the world has changed substantially since that point, and it wasn't expected this way. But perhaps it was predictable, but a lot of things have been exposed as completely fake. The U.S. relationship with the Gulf Arab monarchies has been exposed as completely fake. And that's been the basis of the entire dollar hegemony for the last 50 years. And that's been exposed as completely fake. So we really are in a sort of the birth pangs of a new order. We don't know how it will turn out, what will happen, but certainly some things that have been have been able to last as long as they have are now being exposed as complete frauds, including the myth of U.S. and Israeli military invincibility.
I think you're spot on. Let me delve into that a little bit. We have seen a real opening up of a dialogue over the relationship, and really about the relationship between the United States and Israel. There's been a tremendous amount. I have never seen this much criticism of the relationship with Israel before in the United States. What do you make of that? What do you make of the U.S.'s relationship with Israel, and what does that boil down to for you?
Well, I concur with what you've said. I'm slightly older than you, but I remember, this was unheard of, back, 25 years ago, I suppose, when Pat Buchanan made the comment about Congress being Israeli-controlled territory. Uh, People nowadays don't understand what a sort of metaphorical atomic bomb that was in the U.S. It was, it should have been the end of his career. Nobody can talk to him again. Anytime his name came up, it was Pat Buchanan, who once said that. And for young people today, that seems fairly mild. I mean, that seems like me saying that, my stove is hot when I turn it on. I mean, it's just so taken for granted. So there's been a sea change. And I think Gaza woke up a lot of people. I certainly was radicalized by what happened, what I saw in Gaza. It's a live stream genocide, and I think, despite all of the negative things we can say about Americans, I think there is something deep down where they do have a sense of justice, and I think it was certainly offended by what happened. But Chris, when you look at the polls, that Pew poll just came out a couple of days ago. And it was remarkable because even among Republicans under age 40, I believe, 50% oppose Israel. I never thought I would see that in my lifetime. There were a very, very small percentage of people self-identifying as conservative Republicans that didn't support Israel. You could count them on one hand, basically, and they were known to be that. So that's a massive, massive shift.
I agree with you. In your perspective, do you think there's been a big debate over who controls who? Does Israel control the U.S.? Does the U.S. control Israel? Who wags the dog's tail, so to speak? I want to ask, what is your perspective on that? What is the relation? Who's the real power in this relationship, or is it more symbiotic? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a toxic symbiosis, isn't it? Right?
Mm.
It's a toxic marriage. It's a toxic cohabitation, and it's driven by money, it's driven by greed, it's driven by ideology, eschatology, the end of world, the world sort of philosophy, religion. There are just so many things that draw them together, and it's just become an absolute toxic thing that you couldn't talk about. I mean, if I can just go back to the previous thing, there's a great conservative writer. Unfortunately, he's passed away, but Bob Novak is one of the greatest journalists of all time, I think, in the United States, and he was conservative. And I remember I was at a conservative dinner in D.C., probably about 25 years ago, maybe a couple of years less than that. And this was a room full of people, full of conservatives, who's who, all, very, very prominent people. I even think that, Bill Buckley was there, but people of that stature. And he gave a talk, and he said a line I'll never forget. He said, "Well, I'm different than most conservatives in that I don't support Israel." And you could have heard a pin drop in the room. It is as if he just lit himself on fire. I mean, that's what a radical statement it was just a couple of decades ago. And now you could talk to a young conservative, and that would be just a de rigueur. I don't support Israel. Do you? Why would you? So it's an incredible situation.
I agree with you. 100%. I wanna now kind of shift it to U.S. foreign policy. We've seen, when Trump ran for his third attempt at the presidency, his second successful attempt, he ran on a campaign similar to what we heard from even others like Tulsi Gabbard back in 2020. No endless wars, no regime change wars. We're going to have peace. We're going to focus on domestic issues, the border, immigration, all of these types of things. It turns out that Trump has bombed 8 countries, and we are in the midst of tremendous conflicts and upheavals all over the world. We didn't solve Russia-Ukraine in 24 hours. He didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize because he's lit the world on fire. We captured a president and his wife in the middle of the night in Venezuela and dragged them to the U.S., killing 100 or so people in the process. What do you make of U.S. foreign policy now? Because it seems to me it's the neocon sort of, project for a new American century playbook, and nothing's changed. Those ghouls, those unelected bureaucrats, and sort of the swamp, the deep state swamp that he was talking about, they're there and they have his ear. I don't know what to make of it.
They're parasites, and they endlessly thrive in Washington, D.C. It's a great petri dish for parasites. They can just sort of hang out sub rosa until something emerges. And if it can be a Democrat, it can be a Republican. Bill Kristol liked Hillary Clinton. He liked George W. Bush. They're not, they don't have any political loyalties whatsoever. They're attracted to power and ideology. And that's it. And they have incredible strength. And I would foolishly, I don't vote, so I didn't vote for him, but I foolishly believed that possibly President Trump may have learned his lesson from his first term in office, and he was saying all the right things. He went and talked to the Libertarian Party, where the candidates would not do so, and he explicitly appealed to them on a number of issues, including, the whole Doge issue. And it turns out that I did want him to win because of that. And I knew that he wouldn't be perfect, but I didn't realize how bad things would get, and there were some indications. Very early on, I would say, about a year ago, things started going south. We, at the Ron Paul Institute, organized a conference in the spring of last year. And when we announced it, it was going to be much more positive, much more sanguine. And then we saw some attacks on civil liberties. We saw Doge fizzle out. And so the theme of the conference changed within a couple of weeks. And it's only been downhill from there. So he's been a massive disappointment. He's like a real estate agent from hell, right? As soon as you sign on the line of the contract, he said, hey, the toilets aren't included, the doorknobs aren't included. What's your problem? It's a terrible situation.
Oh, I think you're spot on with that, and the analogy is perfect. I think, and definitely spot on for him. Let me now. You mentioned Doge, and I want to talk about the economic aspect of all of this, because that's something that you all focus on at the Ron Paul Institute. That's something that I know Ron Paul himself was deeply invested in. No pun intended, which was the economic issues. Very much the I think the base issue of the United States is one of the economy. We used to talk about the Federal Reserve, monetary policy, all of that stuff that is at play. What do you think are the economic motives of what Trump is doing? Is it just for himself? And it clearly doesn't seem to have a benefit to the common American worker or farmer for what's going on right now, as they see higher prices at the fuel pump, higher prices for fertilizers, for seed, for food, for consumer goods. What do you make of the economy and the state of things today?
Well, Trump is a servant of the pro-Israel donor class, not of the American people. Once again, he was cosplaying as the blue-collar man's president. I was quite happy to see Republicans starting to talk to the blue collar in America, to working people in America, and to win them over. I thought that was a great thing to happen, because the Democrats sure as hell have dropped them. My grandparents were Democrats because I grew up being heard that the Democrats are the party of the working man. And they dropped that pretty quickly. And that was a great opportunity for Republicans to pick it up. But it was just lip service. It was all an absolute lie. You have, and isn't it kind of funny that every time President Trump is about to make an announcement that will affect the markets, there's a massive multi-million or centimillion bet that comes out, and someone pulls out tons and tons of money. Now, who would know that? Who would be in a position to know that, oh, Trump's about to say this, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple $100 million on it, or $1 billion, or what have you. So the corruption in this administration, or in proximity to this administration, I think is unprecedented. I didn't think it could get worse than Hunter Biden and that whole gang of thieves in the Biden administration. But man, they were Girl Scout cookie salesmen compared to this. This is high level stuff.
I agree with you, and I think that one of the big gains that Trump has made is his enriching himself and his family and his sort of like elite circle. they've made a fortune, actually. They've invested in a lot of countries. Countries have invested in them. They've made money. We have the Trump sons who now have a drone factory, and they're selling that drone technology to the Gulf states. So he starts a war. There's a need for this kind of technology, and then Trump's kids somehow have a factory ready to go to help supply it. I mean, this level of corruption, I mean, this isn't even a free market at this point. This is the worst corruption and really central control in economic terms that I've seen ever. Because in this case, every insider has their options to buy. They know the information ahead of time. And we used to talk about Nancy Pelosi's transactions. Yeah. Now look at the Trump family's transactions and the people around Trump. I mean, this is really appalling, I think.
I think a lot of people have called it the Epstein class, and I think to a degree it's and not necessarily just for the salacious aspects of it, but for the fact that this is the ruling class. These are the people who have no set of morals. They don't care whatsoever. I mean, I was a child, but I do remember in the 1970s when Jimmy Carter was president, and his brother was kind of a hick, Billy Carter, and he introduced a line of beer, Billy Beer, because he liked to drink beer. And it was considered at the time extremely unseemly for a relative of the president to appear to be benefiting from the fact that a relative of his is president. And I think he had to discontinue the Billy Beer, which I was a little bit disappointed. But can you imagine a can of beer compared to, as you say, a drone factory? Oh, I'm the anti-war president, but every time I start a war, my kids get rich. It's beyond unseemly. I mean, every morning I wake up and I wish it was a bad dream. I feel like someone is giving me some hallucinogenics or something. I mean, this doesn't seem like reality.
No, absolutely. We had by the way, so speaking of the economy, we had Doge to come in that was supposed to save the American taxpayer money, was supposed to bring down the deficit and sort of the national debt, was supposed to somehow cut a lot of these costs. Trump is now speaking of a military budget of $1.5 trillion, the most ever in human history, and certainly the most ever in U.S. history. What is the cost to American people, and what's the cost to the future of the United States by just absolutely gutting everything else that we have and investing everything into this behemoth, this bureaucracy that we have, this military bureaucracy, where, as you know, the Pentagon has failed every single audit that has been attempted on it. What's happening here?
Well, it's designed to leave the impression among Americans that they're getting security for all of this, that they are, and also it's all wrapped in the flag, of course, too. So you have a lot of Americans who feel patriotic and can beat their chests that we spend so much on the military. I never call it a defense budget; it's a military budget. But the fact of the matter is, it's a transfer of wealth from working people to the elites. And what do we find out when we're actually tested? When we're tested against not even a peer opponent, but a two tiers down perhaps from a peer opponent in Iran. Well, it turns out that this $1 trillion that we spend every year, and I would say we're already at $1.5 trillion when you add everything together, but this $1 trillion we spend every year doesn't really give us a very powerful military. Yeah, we can blow a lot of things up, but we're also still fighting World War II. We're going around with carriers who can't get anywhere near the action. We're obsessed with air war, which has never been able to complete, a war and end a war and a victory. We're fighting wars that were lost 50 years ago. We're fighting Vietnams, and we have people like Pete Hegseth who run around saying we have won every single battle. Well, that was the case too in Vietnam, but we lost the war. That was the case in Afghanistan, but we lost the war. So the point is, we are spending all of this money on a military that isn't very good. So what does that tell you? It's very good if you are a lobbyist. It's very good if you work for the military industrial complex. But if you actually want to do what militaries are supposed to do, which is win wars, it's not very good.
I think you're spot on. I think you're spot on that. There's a big debate now about NATO and whether NATO is actually going to get involved. The news today is saying that Trump is pressuring NATO to get involved with the Strait of Hormuz because Iran closed it because the Israelis did 160, dropped 160 bombs in 10 minutes, killing, 260 people and wounding over 1,000. So clearly a violation of the ceasefire as we had it from the Pakistani prime minister and from Iran's points that were given to the Trump administration. What do you make of the alliance in all of this? What's the role? What's the future role of NATO? And what's sort of your perspective about where NATO goes from here with the Trump administration and beyond?
I mean, I wonder what he wants them to do. NATO is the U.S. We pay for it. We provide the military. I think the British wanted to sail a warship toward the Mediterranean. They had to borrow one from Germany because they don't have one that works. So that tells you a lot about that. That's one thing. But, NATO, we've been told, it's been hammered into our head for decades, is a defensive alliance. Why would a defensive alliance get involved in a war of choice, which is exactly what the Iran war is? I think they're trying to paper over. They're hoping people will forget that this war was launched by President Donald Trump. It wasn't in response to an attack by Iran or any sort of credible threat from Iran. It was a war of choice. It was a sneak attack launched by President Trump. So why should NATO get involved if it is what they tell us it is, which is a defensive alliance? Now, the answer, of course, is that it's not a defensive alliance. You can ask any Serb about that. But the fact is, I don't understand what President Trump wants from NATO. What I think he wants to do is he wants to get us out of NATO and break up NATO, not because it's a good thing to do, and I do think it would be a great thing to do, but I think the Israelis have made clear that Turkey is next on the menu, and I'm not talking about Thanksgiving, if you know what I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want to go to war with Turkey. And with Turkey and NATO, there's a danger that there would be some sort of response or some obligation to respond. So I think if Trump can blow up, I think he's taking orders from Netanyahu. They said it very, very clearly. I forget which top Israeli politician said it, but it's been said multiple times. Turkey's next. So you get rid of NATO, Turkey out of NATO. Israel seems to be insatiable. It feels like it's backed up by its big brother with a lot of guns, and it's never going to stop. So I think that's really the ultimate plan right now.
I think you're right. I think definitely we've seen the kind of drumbeat to war against Turkey, and especially within Syria. And we know what happened in Syria after the fall of Assad, and then the al-Shara taking power, and the sort of proxy war that has now gone on between Israel and Turkey within Syria. And I think that that's going to that's going to explode and rupture, I think, very soon. And I'm wondering what you think of the U.S. role in Southwest Asia, in the Middle East, in the years to come, because one of the demands of the Islamic Republic of Iran has been, we do not want any more U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf / in the region. And I don't think the U.S. will agree wholesale on that. But I'm wondering, is the U.S. going to deepen its commitment in the region? Is the U.S. going to pull back from the region? What are your thoughts about the where the U.S. goes from here in the region?
Well, that's why I'm a little bit confused about the scheduled talks in Pakistan and Islamabad, because frankly, I don't quite understand what the Iranians are thinking. Now, of course, I'm not sitting there in Tehran worried that an Israeli bomb is going to blow me up. So it's easy from this relatively comfortable chair, to say, why are they quitting? But I don't understand what they hope to get out of these talks. And they're literally going to sit down with Witkoff and Kushner again. They've already been betrayed by this duo twice, who probably, who essentially are Israeli agents. They've already been not only duped, but they've been attacked. They've had their leadership killed based on false talks. The war was already pre-planned when they sat down in January and February. Why would you go meet them? Why would you talk to them again? What would you have to talk to? And if J.D. Vance joins, so what? He was, and I heard your previous guest, you were talking about it. He's the one who put forth the insulting lie that Lebanon was not mentioned in the Pakistani Prime Minister's statement. When we're all able to read, we can see the New York Times had a piece today saying that the U.S. had reviewed the statement before it was posted by Sharif, by the Pakistani Prime Minister. So it had seen that the word Lebanon is in it. The world had read that Lebanon is in it. And with a straight face, J.D. Vance says, "Oh, I think there was a misunderstanding. Lebanon was never in it." The president's spokesperson, Carolyn Levitt, said, "No, Lebanon was never in it, right? And right after the statement was released, President Trump released a statement on Truth Social saying that I have received the 10 points from Iran. I've reviewed them, and I think that could be a good basis for a conversation. And then again, the administration lied to our faces and laughed in our faces, saying, "Well, we threw that in the trash." That's what Levitt said. And I think it was Vance who said, "Yeah, it looked like they wrote it with ChatGPT, so we just threw it away." The lying is so blatant and so brazen. I don't understand what Iran is hoping to gain from this. The United States is not capable of making agreements. It's proved that over and over again, not just in the Middle East, but look what happened in Alaska with Presidents Putin and Trump when they met. President Putin left that meeting absolutely certain that they had an agreement. They discussed things in detail over a long period of time, and then President Trump returned to Washington and acted as if they had never met. So there was nothing written down, just as there's nothing written down concretely about this ceasefire. Frankly, I don't understand what the Iranians are hoping to get out of this.
I don't know either, and I think that we're going to see probably the ceasefire. In my estimation, I think that the markets are looking at it. You have all those betting sites and things where people are looking. I don't know if the ceasefire will last, and I think that if Israel continues its aggression against Lebanon, and by the way, renewed aggression against Gaza, I think it's tonight where the deadline for Hamas to give up its arms actually expires, and then Israel said that they're going to resume conflict there. Who knows what's to come, I think, in the coming days and weeks. I do want to ask you before I let you go, I have about just 2-3 minutes left. We have the midterms coming up this year. So we have midterms coming up. We just had this war of choice, as you rightfully put. We've seen all of these conflicts brewing. What are American voters going to do with the Republicans in office? What are they going to do with the Democrats that are there? What is sort of your, if you had a crystal ball, what's your prediction as of now for where we head in November?
Well, the good news is that the Republicans are going to lose, but the bad news is that the Democrats are going to win. So that's where you have it. You probably saw Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, yesterday criticizing Trump's war on Iran, not because it was a stupid war that hurt the United States, but because he didn't achieve his objectives. So that's the opposition party in the U.S. They each vie to be more pro-war than the other. We don't have a peace party in the U.S., so frankly, it doesn't matter who wins. All you can do is punish the ruling party. And now the only thing that you could hope for, even as cynical as it would be on the part of the Democrats, is if they are able to take the House and Senate, that you might see an impeachment trial against President Trump and a removal from office, which I think would be a great gift to the United States. Again, the only problem is that there would be a president who succeeds him that will. I don't know that he could be as bad, but certainly wouldn't be the type of person that you and I would be very happy to see.
Absolutely. And in just a minute left, let me ask you, what do you think if the Democrats take power? What does the last 2 years of the Trump presidency look like? We'll have sort of like an extended lame duck period, so to speak. But do you see the Democrats also maybe trying to push for more support for Ukraine, more support for Europe and NATO, which is traditionally where they're at now? Is that a concern for you?
Well, they could try to do that, but we're out of money. We're $37 trillion in debt. They can do whatever they want. I mean, I could go, I could wish that I could go out and buy a Ferrari, but guess what? It's not going to happen because I don't have any money. So they can do whatever they want. I think, they'll pursue the agenda that we saw under the Biden. You'll see the return of a lot of sort of sort of the woke stuff or what have you. I don't know what it is. You'll probably see some differences in immigration, but nothing substantive. I think the one achievement that they could have, now maybe they'll spend less on the military. I mean, they love war as much as anyone. Maybe they will. The one achievement I do think would be the impeachment and removal of President Trump from office, who shows that he is not qualified in any way, shape, or form to hold that office.
Yeah, they might invoke the 25th Amendment too. Who knows? There's a lot of things that could happen from now until then, and until the Trump presidency, eventually, ceases to be when we get to 2028. I want to thank you so much, Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. It's always a pleasure. Look forward to having you on the show again soon, and take care of yourself. Stay safe.
Thank you, Chris.
So there you have it. A lot of things are going on. A lot of things are happening. Great perspective from Daniel McAdams. And also, I think, a very truthful perspective about how many Americans are feeling today, which is that their money, their hard-earned tax dollars are going to these endless wars once again, these never-ending regime change wars. People are frustrated. People are upset. And ultimately, they want some change. But as you rightfully know, I think many of our viewers and listeners will be aware. Sadly, the U.S. political system is a uniparty, like we say. It's really one party with two faces: Republicans and Democrats. And that's the sad part, and that's the reality that we have to deal with and we have to contend with. I think ultimately one of the major concerns is where we head with the ceasefire. Where we head with the next military budget. Does the United States deepen its military commitment in the Middle East? If that happens, at what cost to the American taxpayer? At what human cost to the Iranian people, to the Lebanese people, the Iraqi, Yemeni, Palestinian people, and so on and so on? I think that there's real concern over this. We haven't seen a cessation in the fighting in Ukraine. I think that there's a question over whether the U.S. support for Ukraine will continue. So far, it has, including in arms and intelligence. We've seen that China and Taiwan recently, the KMT, the Kuomintang, visited, the chair visited China. There's deepening concerns over what could happen in the Pacific, and the U.S. is very focused on China. So overall, there's a lot of concerns, a lot of things happening. I think that all of you should continue to, tune in, to stay aware of all of these developing issues. The midterm elections are going to be critical this year. There's no doubt about that. And I think that we're going to bring you all of the news, all the latest, all that we can here at Endgame. And please follow us, like, comment, subscribe, share on YouTube. And thank you again for tuning in. Christopher Halali signing out.